Violated the rule 30 seconds in. So,
Didn't take long.
well, welcome to Uncode. This will be Uncode Volume 3. This is April 3rd. I think maybe we should start it out with that as well, so we have context of them when we're making it. But if you haven't seen our YouTube channel, search for Elms LN on YouTube. Tom has been posting them there. Thank you, Tom. So we have both of our past episodes there. It was a really good conversation around styles and designing things in the last one for sure. We have new people on the call. It's awesome. So anyone that wasn't here on the previous two, what we do is we go down at the very beginning and very quickly just say who you are, where you work, and if you have a question or something you want to have a conversation about or something that you want to show that you've been working on. So I will just say your name, and then that way we can kind of cycle through who unmutes a bit. So I'm Brian Olodike. I work at Penn State on HAX the Web. I'm interested in showing something that came out last meeting was the notion of like lazy importing of assets. So I've created 3 projects this week, got the last one working half an hour ago, and I want to show it off, get some feedback on it. Hey, Bob. All right, so Bob says hi in the chat window. All right, observing, that's perfectly fine. Potter?
Mike Potter, work here at Penn State, at home at Penn State. And I was going to show a dynamic image resizer and how that might work with web components. So we'll see if I can get the demo working.
We can get it working again. Yeah, I knew that's what I was going to was about. Well,
I just unkilled the thing I built last night that I killed about 2 hours ago.
Yeah, so why don't you say hi, Nikki?
Oh, I guess I could. Yeah, Nikki Massaro Kaufman, and I also work at Penn State, or else in my office filled with cats. And I am running on very little sleep because I was working on getting our storybook up and running, and then found a way to set up knobs according to some of the properties we already have in our elements. So I am fortunate enough that I have that available to demo.
Super pumped about that. I can't wait to see it, even though I already saw it. Earl, did you wanna say hi and hop in?
Hey everyone, my name's Earl Neitzel, and I work on Sakai, kind of a neighboring project of Perio here, and we're using web components, and I'm just here to hang out with the web component people, I guess, find out what's going on.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining. If you wanted to show or mention what you're doing with web components and the Sakai editor, I mean, like, I wouldn't be upset about it.
Yeah, so it's just one of the web components we're working on is to basically take CK editor and put it, so Sakai uses CK editor as its main input editor, right? WYSIWYG editor. You know, it's integrated in the old way, which is, you know, all this JavaScript injected onto all these pages, wherever it's used, yada, yada, yada. And so what we want to do is, you know, we're sort of refactoring that into a web component so that, you know, we can just simply put our nice, beautiful tag on a page and not have to, you know, render it in that fashion. And probably the biggest thing that I love about it is hiding all of CKEditor biz behind a tag, and just that separation there that it gives you. So that this way, all we do is we teach Sakai about the Sakai editor tag, right? And in reality, we could probably put any WYSIWYG editor we wanted to behind that tag, not just CK editor.
Confusing. In reality, any editor, you say. That's very interesting, Earl. Andrew, you got anything to show or say hi today?
Don't have anything to show today. Just coming by and seeing what's going on.
I love your background, man.
Everything's just fine.
Everything is fine. This is fine. Adrian, you have anything to show or say hi or whatever? Or not is also fine. Katrina, I think you're also lurking on this call, but you're welcome to say hi if you want to.
I am lurking. Katrina Ware. I work at Penn State with all of these yahoos, as Brian would say. I'm an instructional designer. I use the stuff, so I'm excited to see what y'all are working on.
Cool. And Rebecca, would you like to say hi?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Goodman. I'm the web branch chief at U.S. National Archives. We are working on absolutely nothing. No, I'm just kidding. We're working on incorporating web components into archives.gov, and I'm actually preparing a presentation for the Archivist of the United States, which will include a briefing on HAX. So that's super fun.
Curious. I don't even know why that would be a thing, but
I
that's neat of you to
couldn't
suggest
even
it.
begin to fathom.
That's so cool. I mean, huh? How about that? So anyway, thank you all for joining. So we've got sounds like me, Mike, Nikki, at least. We want to kick stuff off. I will attempt to force you to show something later.
Oh, and I'll say that there's another DevOps person over there who occasionally dips into web components, but he's not important.
Well, you're welcome to have other people join the call if they would like to make themselves known instead of talking about them in the background on a recorded meeting that goes out for all eternity and has a weird cryptic statement like that. Anyway, if you haven't noticed, most of us get along, so that helps too. Nikki, are you ready to kick us off with Storybook Land?
Oh, geez, I'm first. I guess.
Well, my printer is running right next to the microphone. I don't want it to get picked up.
All right. I guess I can do that. Just give me a second to share my screen. And yes, we want that one. So I actually have the stories live now, or at least the ones I started at. Our version of Storybook was really old and outdated, and I was in Webpack hell for about 3 or so days trying to get all of this stuff put together. But then I finally decided just to use the OpenWC stuff, and it worked magically at a moment where I guess it was really late at night that that I basically complained to Brian and said, look, I've been doing this 3 days and I don't know how to, I don't think I'm going to get this stuff to work, and I'm just going to move on to something else. And then about the time he's like, yeah, this stuff is really hard. I'm like, actually, unintentional April Fools. The OpenWC stuff worked really well for this. So, so I do have it working, which is, you know, kind of nice because, you know, I'd like to be like everybody else who gets stuff working. I've got all the knobs in here to make the adjustments. So you can see oh, this is also really fun. I have it right now randomly putting in community quotes because I thought Katrina would be amused.
I am, thank you.
You're welcome. But yeah, you can kind of adjust everything with all the knobs, but I didn't want to have to hard code all of those knobs in. So yeah, the getting Storybook to work was a hard part. And so that was probably the hardest part of the battle. But then once I got it working, and here you can see our pickers and all of that. But once I was able to get it working, I'm like, we have, I don't know, how many elements do we have at this point, Brian?
So I just did a I did a learn a publish right before the meeting, and it said 172 repos went out to NPM, but I estimate we have around 400 elements.
Yeah.
So how many of those are reusable? Probably like 150.
So I don't want to have to do a couple hundred of these things over and over again from scratch, looking at all of their properties. And so what I decided was that I wanted to do it the lazy way. So if I go into Simple Picker, I'll use that one. Well, actually, let's do Accent Card because it's the easiest. What I wanted to do was, instead of having to map all those properties to knobs, I just wanted it to find the properties. And so, so I basically created this thing called Storybook Utilities. I used it before in our old version of Storybook, but the amount of code I still needed to create the stories was a pain. So I cleaned it up with the new version. And if I pull up Storybook Utilities, it's doing all the heavy lifting of opening or importing all the knob types. It pulls in that simple colors color library I've demoed in the past. I'm working on getting it to do some lorem ipsum. It will get all the colors from simple colors to make them options within those knobs. So if I go back to my accent card, All of these colors are pre-populated for me in any element that happens to have a property that's mapped to simple colors. Then it's actually going through and I have it getting the HAX properties. All of our elements that get used in HAX, and let me pull up accent card. They all have a section called HAX properties. So you can see this is what actually connects it with HAX so that HAX knows which fields you fill in to update the components that you're creating within it. My cat agrees. So you can see there are settings, there are, each setting has a property, which is the property that's set on the element, the title that the user sees in the field. You get an input method, and that input method is really defining what the field type is. Notice that we have some custom ones that I had to change the mapping to. And we also then have icons that get used in the HAX interface. Options for selects. So basically all of the data I would need to map things to knobs, all of that is actually right here. And so in my code for Storybook Utilities, I'm just going through looking for HAX properties. If I have HAX properties, I use those, loop through them, and there's a point where I decide what type of knob and what the values are. If those properties aren't available, then I just look at the card's properties themselves that are defined in the component, which give me a little less to work on as far as what type of field to use and what type of default values, but it's still better than working with nothing. So then when I go down to my knob settings, oh, here's where I've been setting random shit. So if I didn't want to have an empty value in some of my components, I can set some random stuff. I built myself a few random things, like if I give you a list of options, just pick one randomly. If I want a random number between X and Y, here's this random. All of this I was just building out today. This is my random community text that will be replaced by lorem ipsum. This is where the magic of setting the knobs happens by looking at my different HAX items and turning them into knobs. And then I make the element by iterating through those knobs and setting those properties. And I send the element back to the story. I also have the option to add some custom default values. So if I don't want to just trust it to something random and get some kind of a random image, I can set what my, in this one, I want an animated and a non-animated. So I didn't want to just trust this to some random image generator to pull that off. So I set those values, and you can see in Simple Picker, one of the things I haven't gotten ready and working yet is the knobs for arrays. I mean, if this were just set of strings, it would be different, but it's choking for me. So right now I'm just setting the options in here instead of allowing those to be an option that can be set in the knobs. But it's kind of nice to be able to set these up, to be able to override some of the things, or just let it go and have it set some defaults. I think that pretty much covers what I've been doing with it so far. Any particular questions about it?
So the random content that you're assigning, I've been wondering, like, when you're using HAX and you select a type that you're going to put in the page, I wonder if there's some happy middle ground between us taking some of that fodder content that you're injecting and actually having some way of telling HAX that, like, hey, I'm not just, so for example, if you drop a, like an accent card, if you drop it into HAX right now, it basically doesn't fill the space until you start filling out the fields and doing something useful with it.
Oh, so if we actually add some HAX fields to define what we want the default to be, and some of those could actually be calling upon a random.
It could be, yeah. I'm wondering if maybe there's some happy middle ground there where we actually just make HAX able to, like,
God, I
certain
love that.
type, if they define something like that, ship with, you know, some fodder content. The issue was like, I sort of did that for a little bit with images, so that, because if you drop in an image, you got to have something there or else nothing.
Yeah.
shows up.
Well, we could have a set of like generic placeholder images that then get placed that way.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I like this.
Images, especially, like, really anything that has layout implication is where it becomes problematic. I mean, if it's, you know, that bitter much title thing, like, that's nice to have it there, because then it's like, well, I can see visually where the placeholder is going to be for that piece. But
well, and not all slots are slots that are necessary, so it's nice to be able
also
to
true.
define that into, you know, define that in the HAX properties. Then you kind of have a sense, because I use the HAX properties to think about, well, how's the end user who's not, you know, using it as a tag going to interact with it? And to me, that maps really well toward knobs. And so maybe, you know, like, I don't necessarily need a footer or a subheader in here. I mean, I can add one, but I can see what the card does without it.
True. I also wonder is there a place in the knob for a descriptive text, since we have descriptions that float with it? Or, I mean, I haven't seen them, so.
There is not. So the best I could do, I did the, you know, I have the human readable title and the property name next to it when I ran this. But yeah, I have it doing all kinds of fun randoms, like, where's the random color? Oh yeah. So we have the random colors that come from simple colors, but then for anything that needs just a hex code, I have it now generating random hex codes as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's also, you mentioned in the schema part where you try and just make up what the values are.
Mm-hmm.
There's primitive fallback support in HAX that if an element is dumped into the DOM that doesn't have HAX properties, it'll try and do something similar and just make them up. So I wonder if you couldn't either combine that code or enhance the way HAX is doing it, or just read right off of it. There's also,
or, do we drop some of this into simple fields?
yeah, or something like that too.
Because maybe simple fields need some of this too.
Yeah, almost like a like guess what the thing is, right? Because some of it is, you're right, it's like, well, this is a string, I guess I'll just give you a text input. Others, like the way that HAX does the search inputs and maps that to real data, you can do some intelligent guesses at times. So like if something is source or href, you can basically fake that into being a URL field as opposed to a normal field. Another one that I'll do is, oh shoot, what is it? Like alt. Like I have a special field for alt that, you know,
which is just a required text field.
Yeah, right. So like simple stuff like that we can have at least some primitive mapping. When something isn't loaded though, I do at least trigger a warning in the console that's like, hey, you would get better support if you actually did da da da. But
yeah. So yeah, so this is like just barely up and running, and I have not put all however many elements we have in here yet, because I haven't really gotten to play with all of the data types and figure out, but this really gives me something to go on to think about how this might work in HAX schema and how we want it to work in HAX schema.
And if there's any ability to overlap it with a custom element
yes.
.json file, which was a provocative idea. Who's that? I think Benny brought that up on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we could definitely have something where we set precedents, like try this, if we don't have this, try that, and if we don't have that, try this. So we could go from HAX to the custom elements JSON, and then at the very least properties with some of the, you know, guesswork that you're doing.
It's awesome, Nikki. I know it's only half done, but
it doesn't feel awesome yet.
Well, the hard part is
just
done.
Getting it going was a lot of work, and I'm like, everybody else gets this shit to work. Why is it that it's so hard for us?
I get a little annoyed. I mean, before you went and tackled that, I was getting really annoyed with just the general sentiment was like, well, yeah, if you did a project that automatically worked with Webpack, this wouldn't be a problem. It's like,
Yeah, searching for this shoe was
hey,
really difficult because it's like, okay, but this is for other people's use cases. I'm looking for this specific piece of help on my specific use case, which is kind of different. So yeah, I got really frustrated, and there was a point where, yeah, I was gonna walk away from it. And that's the point that I unintentionally April Fooled you.
how much of our existing story files is usable, or are you basically just burning that configuration down? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, actually that's good because it was, this will give me a better chance to build something, you know, that works better than what we had before.
I have a quick
But-
question, if you don't mind, Nikki,
Sure.
about your story. Since you were just mentioning that you got Storybook up and running, is the Storybook that you're using, is it like the web component version, or is it
Yes.
like one of the? Okay.
Yes,
What-
I used the OpenWC web component version,
Okay.
and it was like night and day. It was me and Storybook hell for days and days and days. And believe me, I picked this up like a year ago and also was frustrated. I had it working, and then we updated some stuff, and I blamed Brian for killing it last year. And then I tried to fix it. I'm like, well, I don't have time for this. I need to build stuff. So I walked away from it, tried it again. It was still a pain. And then I did the OpenWC stuff, which was specifically built around our use case of web components. So I didn't run into all of those little weird problems where everything was built around React and Vue and all the other stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was, because we're starting to begin to, well, at least we've made the decision to go ahead and set up a Storybook for web components.
Mhm.
And in our initial looking, or in my initial investigation, I was like, oh boy, you know, they've got all these, but they don't have the web component one. And I've been looking around, and I've not I've not gotten as far as you have, but
And this doesn't even feel like far.
hearing your story, I wanted to ask.
Well, and I am telling you that it's a struggle because I definitely, you know, the impression I get once that it's up is like, well, why the expletive deleted? Can't I figure this out? Everybody else has, and it's actually kind of hard. But the OpenWC stuff made a heck of a lot of difference. It was.
Could you post a link to that? Just so
I absolutely can do that. Let me.
Thanks.
Yeah, I threw a couple links to the package
you have it.
JSON. Yeah, that Nikki's referencing.
Oh, great.
Specifically on this one, Earl. Like this is where I was getting so like rant laden forceful at Open Apereo about the need for us to collaborate on our mono repo structures.
Right.
Because like these lessons in these little things are just, I mean, Nikki would have no idea if me and Mike Potter's on here didn't fight with the tooling a year earlier, and we had no idea how to build this stuff without looking at what Red Hat was doing with Patternfly at the time. So these and then you end up feeling silly because in the end it's like, well, we have like basically the same configuration. I just literally didn't know what to use. So Nikki, speaking of which, once you get this working with ours, that would be a really good piece to backport into the not OpenWC, the WC factory tooling.
Oh, that's on my list. Once I
Okay,
get it the
good.
way I want it, I need to look at that. I also kind of want to centralize. I saw that the Patternfly folks are now doing a gulp file factory so that we don't have a million different variations of gulp files floating around. So
That would be nice too.
that's on my Nikki to-do list too. I like to clean virtual house, just not real house. But I'm gonna post some links to the repo so that you can also see how everything's configured.
Awesome. So we had 3 people join while you were having that conversation. Before I get to having them say hello, does anybody have any other questions for Nikki or relative to Storybook? Sick. All right. So we had 3 people join. If you want to say hi, and like if you're interested in showing anything, feel free to
Latecomers get a
jump in.
quiz.
Latecomers get a quiz, though. Yes. Mike, then Chuck, then Alice, based on just the visual order I'm viewing here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike. I'm not a developer, but I've been involved with the project in different ways over the years, I guess. More on the interface kind of thinking side of it. I'm going to be working on web components related to OER schema in the future, which is more education focused, but trying to figure out how to do drag and drop remix of schematized objects in a way that might make the most sense. So I'm going to be working with someone who actually knows how to program to do that. So hopefully Alex will be doing some pull requests in the future, Brian. So
awesome. Yeah. How can we pay Alex to do work on our projects?
I don't know.
It was nice when he worked for the university and that was the case. We didn't have to pay him, but
yeah, like I've tried to pay him through grant money before. He's like, nah. Like, okay. I don't know. But he's just kind of interested in working in his free time on these projects. So he's working with someone else on what was that project he talked about? It's like he basically is building his own badging system for K through 12 now. That's going to turn into an LMS system from what it sounds like. Because they all do. Yeah, eventually once you start adding management into it and users, it becomes an LMS. But anyway, yeah, that's the only news I have or anything interesting.
Right. So we may have a conversation if we have enough time at the end that would involve this. Nikki and I were talking earlier today about the notion of linking to paragraphs, and I think there could be some overlap in the way we go about attacking that. We could rope in OER schema as the thing that's driving the linkage to paragraphs, which is a requirement that NARA's auditing system came up with. So not specific to OER schema, but I think we could rope it in.
Well, and if not OER schema, some other schema. I mean, there's so many schemas out there, and there might be one that makes more sense. OER schema, just as some of you know already, like it extends schema.org. So, anything that is on schema.org would also be useful for helping define the projects that we build with OER schema as well. So, yeah.
I love that you're in the mountains too, by the way.
Yeah, someone else
hi?
Airbnb. Yeah.
What's up, everyone? I'm Chuck. I work at the Office of Digital Learning for Eberly, and I do a lot of work on, lately just doing web components with HAX CMS, which is our own content management system. We just released our new website, department site at odl.science.vsu.edu. And I'm going to be doing probably more websites for other people in our area. And then also we have faculty that we serve that come up with cool ideas for things that they want to put in their courses. So we try to, Mike and I work together to make those things reality for them.
Do you have anything you want to show this week?
Not particularly. We've just been doing triage on the website. Right, Mike?
Fair enough. Alice, you there?
Hey, yeah, no, I'm here. So I don't have anything to share this week. I work with outreach and information technology. I'm working on a comprehensive documentation strategy for that group, along with some other folks in my team. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Sick. All right. Well, welcome back. This is a very Penn State heavy call this week. Mike, are you queued up and ready? Otherwise, I can show what I've been working on. I have it ready, so it's up to you.
Yeah, I can do mine real quick. I think.
Boom. Not real quick though. I want to see it. You got to fill an hour.
Gotcha.
Dead air. Fill the dead air.
All right. So we'll talk very slowly here. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
All right. Ballin'. So Brian has just been on our case for so long to optimize our images, probably for years now.
It does seem like
And
years.
it's just one of those things where I fundamentally don't want to, and it's not because I'm a bad person.
It is.
It's because I would really like to get to the state where you upload an image of the original size, and the website hangs on to it and just makes derivatives of it, like you get from the typical CMS, right? But to do that in a static site can be a little tricky, because what you end up having to do is you have to generate derivatives for all the different sizes at build time. And you have to do that regardless of whether anybody is ever going to call that file or not. So it can get quite expensive on your server, and it's just a lot of stuff to maintain. So there's a service called Imaginary. I keep saying it wrong, but it's called Imaginary. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do know that they have a Docker container, Docker image for it. And the purpose of it is to be a sort of function as a service where you pass your images to this server and you specify whether you want it resized or cropped or put a watermark on it. Just there's a ton of different options here. Compressed, opacity, and it will generate a derivative of your original file for you and serve it up for your users. So the idea is, let's say that we have this image. This is our original. This is the image that we would upload for our article. What we would then do is we could pass this over to our Imaginary service, which I have it running locally here. What we're going to say is, I want this image cropped. So we're going to hit the crop endpoint, and we're going to specify the URL. And this URL is a little weird just because of my development setup, but it's going to be URL equals p HAX CMS sites ODL HAX CMS. Oh, yeah. Hold on. URL. There we go. Okay, so it says we're missing height and width. So we're going to add a width to it of, let's say, 300. And all of a sudden, we have this new image that is not our original, and it's all cropped and weird. But it's a new image, so we could just keep hitting that over and over and over again, and it's going to keep serving that image up. Let's make this a little bit more realistic by setting a height, by saying width 300, height 300. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So again, here's our original, and that's our new derivative. Now we can get a little funky with this, where let's say that what we really want this image for is like a thin banner that goes across the top. So the banner would have some really odd dimensions, like 800 width by only 250 pixels high. So that's our new banner there, and that looks great. But then we might be creating like a little card icon, like we have here on our ODL website, where it doesn't look very good in this position here, right? You can't see the person in this photo. So what we could do is could add another parameter that's called gravity east. And we'll set, before we do that, we got to set the height. So let's set these dimensions as like 300 wide or 200 wide by like 500 tall. And there we go. Now the person's in the background. If we set north, we'd get that, but we want this person in the background. So that's a super powerful service. So the question is, what does that have to do with web components? And I'm kind of still trying to figure that out. But my thinking is that instead of just having image tags, or in this case, what we did is we had a news card web component, and we were just setting the image of, we were having the user set the image property, and then we'd set that as the background of this little area here. Instead of doing that, what we could do is say, well, for this card, we want to grab the image, but then we're going to run that image through our imaginary service. And I'm going to set not resize, but I'm going to set crop to, and then we're going to say the width is going to be, let's say 400, and the height, that looks about 600. And yeah, let's set that. Let's see what we get.
Was there supposed to be an equal sign in there?
Yes, there was. Thank you very much.
Peer programming.
Yeah. Okay, so looks better. Like these all look good, but this one looks a little rough. We still would like to be able to specify the gravity of this. So if I manually go in here and add gravity equals east, then we get that person in the background. So I'm thinking that, you know, we could also set, in addition to these settings here, we could set, you know, gravity for this card, and the gravity could be dynamic. So we'll set gravity as string, say this gravity equals east by default, or maybe center by default.
I could use this on accent card.
Yes.
Yeah. Then the chore becomes, how do we ship assets that are not 100% tied to a, you know, made up endpoint? So like optionally tying in if this exists, which could be a good case for like a singleton paradigm.
Okay.
That we listen for, you know, like if this global class exists, then allow it to rewrite the image based on these settings. Otherwise, use the default one that's passed in or something.
Right. Correct. Yeah. So we could, in our HAX CMS land, we wouldn't really be setting that information on the web component itself. This web component is dynamically created by HAX CMS. So what it does is it takes a look at all of the site.json items. So if I search for Horizon report, what I could do is somewhere in the fields here, I could set maybe, I don't know, maybe some resize options, or maybe I could target the news card image settings. And so for I could specify an override for that gravity setting in here. And then in my news card, instead of looking for it on the property, what I could do is I could look for it in the store, which it doesn't look like I have it set up. So I'm not going to go into all that, but
no, but that's a pretty provocative idea.
Yeah, if you watch the demo that Chuck gave a couple weeks ago, he went into getting those settings from the store, which look a lot like store active item. So HAX CMS gives you access to the active item. In that case, you'd be drilling down fields, news, images, gravity, something like that. So it's a really interesting service, and the cool thing is that it seems to have all the caching and everything figured out. They have some documentation on how to beef up the load balancing a little bit if you're serving a lot of different sites. But this could be a service that could be used by lots of different web properties simultaneously. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, Andrew, have you used any? I know you've done some stuff with image manipulation services before. Have you heard of that or anything in the neighborhood?
So that particular one is new. There's several different image processing libraries that are out there, particularly focused around a standard called IIIF, International Image Interchange Framework. You can find it at IIIF.io. There's several different, awesome, Rebecca. There's several different image servers that are available, but that one in particular is kind of interesting, and I hadn't seen it before because of its Docker first mentality. A lot of these are, so the IIIF standard is basically to create a RESTful API for both images in particular, as well as groups and collections, and I forget what the next level up is for image libraries, if you will, but it's for the idea of dealing with images and redistributing all of those. So I would highly recommend that you look at something along those lines. I was just putting a couple of pings out to folks in the IIIF community to ask if anybody had talked with this imaginary folk to see if they've had any interaction with them. Because quite honestly, a lot of the flags and whatnot are consistent with what you would find on the API for IIIF. IIIF is being really very heavily supported by libraries and museums on the notion that pretty much every one of them is trying to get their collections as online and reusable by as many different people as possible. And so I would imagine IIIF will continue to grow in usage.
Yeah.
Library of Congress, Smithsonian, the adoption is pretty large. The Getty as another example. And it's doing exactly what you're talking about, Mike, as far as dynamic regeneration of that image. It's actually what we use for the Pennsylvania newspaper archive as well.
So I just sent a link that Mike pulled up to the 3D Smithsonian project, and it actually uses both web components and IIIF, which is super neat. And a lot of what they're doing here is really, really cool. They launched it a couple weeks back, probably about 2 weeks after we launched our first web component on National Archives. We did it first. They did it better.
Not a big deal.
I'll admit it. It's fine. But no, they legitimately did a really good job here, and we are working with. So Library of Congress actually uses some of their 3D modeling stuff as well. That's utilizing web components and is also using web components on some of their stuff they've recently launched also. So this is a fun fact. But they've gone to, just to echo what the wonderful person who was just speaking was talking
Andrew.
about. Thank you. Andrew was talking about, yeah, it's really, really big in the museum world, and especially in a lot of collections and public spaces. And then we actually released a policy stating that everybody who's digitizing stuff needs to start incorporating IIIF as it becomes available. So like that's in written word. It's kind of cool. So that's all I got.
Potter, have you heard of how they built this Voyage Explorer thing? I mean, I know that we played around with, what was that, 3.js?
D3.
D3.
Yeah,
Wait, was that D3?
3JS.
3JS. Okay.
D3 is built off 3. Yeah, I don't know. Justin Fignani might be able to tell us. I think this is built off Model Viewer, the Google web component that does 3D modeling.
It might be, but the two people who actually developed this for the Smithsonian, I can probably get them to join next week if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Okay, yeah.
That'd be fantastic.
We've been working on a collaboration project, so I've been talking to them quite a bit. So yeah, I can try to see if they're available. The developer is actually in Michigan. He's getting ready to move to DC, although he might not be now with everything going on, but yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah.
They might have actually built this themselves because
yeah, I don't see Model Viewer in there.
Yeah, they have
and they've got these FF tags everywhere.
Yeah, and SV Scene View. Yeah,
it's interesting.
Awesome.
So the
with
T-Rex one is
IIIF or the imaginary stuff, is there a way to like manipulate or stylize the images like as it's being manipulated and served to the user?
So after talking to the Smithsonian guys, and this is what they told me, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the Justin fellow on Twitter also confirmed, there is no way to incorporate 3D and IIIF yet together. And so they've done it on their flat images and then their 2D renderings of the 3D images, but not on the actual 3D models like that you're seeing in the background over here itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's going to depend upon your image server is what it comes down to.
Yeah, Tom, was your question more like, did you mean, could you take an image and then say, make it black and white?
Yeah, so like Mike was just showing us like resizing the original image, but like either doing a black and white filter, or like let's say your brand has like a light blue, like 38% opacity on like a blue kind of filter on top of the image or something like that.
Right.
Can you like give it like a base image and then also tell it like add these specific either styling filters or augment or change the image in like this specific way and then render that out to like a website or something like that?
The properties Mike was hovering over that I know he's typing in now would appear that that is the case. It also has watermark in there. I thought it was BW or something.
Yeah, I think the color property was for the watermark specifically. So you might have to define.
Yeah.
It's an RGB value there.
Oh, color space.
There's black
there
and
we
white.
Go. Nice.
And then, does anyone know an RGB value off the top of their head?
Obviously, 52, 6, 19. I mean,
sick. That's totally sepia.
Who doesn't know that though? I mean, geez, what a question to ask. Nikki, because I like trying to come up with ideas that like become like a mind virus for you so that you don't work on the studio. What do you
You've been doing this all day.
I know it's just my
Collins is
distraction
gonna
game.
kick your ass.
Again, like all we have to do is bleep Nikki on all of these, Tom. That's all.
I have to give Tom something to bleep. At least I got some of the bigger things out of the way this morning.
It's true.
Dealing with
But-
healthcare bullshit.
but
Okay, so what mind virus are you going to infect me with this time?
So I have toyed with the idea of having this thing that is a site you go to that you fill out the fields and it actually writes HAX schema for you.
Mhm.
In a similar vein, what if there was something that basically interfaced with the
So I was just going
Imaginary
to ask
API?
this shit about this. Like, yeah, were we looking for writing a component that's an interface that helps manipulate that?
Oh, like you mean like how they did with like Xcode and making things super simple to write apps? Because or are we on two different pages? Because I was actually thinking about the idea of like helping like a user interface that helps people create their own web components without actually them necessarily needing to write the code. No,
That
just
would be cool
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, something along those lines, like basically adding an interface on top of that with sliders for these things and checkboxes, and so that
Yeah.
you could be adjusting that in real time as you adjust the little interface elements.
So if
But
we
yeah.
had a singleton, like if we had a singleton that was like the imaginary imaginary service hyphen service element, and then the way things would implement that is they would do some global function check to see if it exists. If it does, then they would have to fire some callback. But what you could make a UI piece for is actually structuring what the data that goes into that callback should look like. So you could checkbox, like Tom is going to want to go and hit a checkbox that says make this sepia. That would be fantastic. I mean, I don't want to have to remember what that code is either.
I'm trying really hard not to swear
But
right
you were
now.
doing such a good job
You're
of remembering
such
the
a
code.
good job. So good. You're doing so good. Anyway,
Okay.
that seems. I
Got-
mean,
Maybe got
that's
that out
just-
of my system, but I'm going to sit on my hands too, because why do you have to divert me or like make me feel like there aren't
it's
enough
such a cool
hours in the day?
idea. It's just such a cool idea. I think it would be beneficial to society to do that. To work on cool ideas,
Mike, with the imagery or imaginary thing you were showing, is there a way to like layer images? For example, like if I wanted 3 layers, like like the base photo, a red layer that's slightly offset and a blue layer that's slightly offset, is that too complicated for?
That I don't know. That might be in the. That's just the watermark.
Yeah, that could be a watermark. Well, so what you could do in Drupal land with Image Magic or whatever their library was, is you would start doing derivatives of derivatives. So you would have, you might do one that is, so if you considered the red to be the base layer and then watermarked it with the blue and then used that whole URL as the input for the next one that then watermarked the green or something.
Yeah.
So you could chain them together. I'm, again, assuming that's possible because you could do that in much, much technically inferior services of the past. Those are a really nice way of talking about Drupal Image Magic. All right, does anybody have any other questions about imaginary or manipulation services of this kind? Going once, going twice. All right, now we're on to D3. So, and by D3, I don't mean the JS library. I mean Mighty Ducks 3, people, okay? The one with the added sound effects and whatnot. So, what I wanted to show is kind of a combination of some of the past things we talked about last few calls here. One, we got our CDN working off of CloudFront. So my course delivers its assets from CloudFront unless I sit on the page too long and it times out, or unless I'm doing a live demo and they've turned off the server again or something, which would be hilarious. Thinking about it. It's really thinking about it. Let's go to this other website. Anybody else hop on university VPN and then hop off and then all university links break? Seems to happen to me a couple times a day.
Remember when
University
I said
VPN is problematic.
Yeah, I'm
I just don't
finding
use
that.
VPN.
remember when I was particularly frustrated this morning, Brian? It
Yeah.
was the university VPN that started all of the rage.
Well, anyway, the thing I was trying to show with it is, so we've got our web components. They power that other website, but they also power now our online course portfolio, which when I'm not having weird VPN issues, you can see is actually pretty ridiculously fast. Now, the big deal with our new integration, again, if this would load, is the stuff that I showed in the unbundled builds work. So this unbundled web components repo basically boils any integration down, and Nikki can confirm this now because I think she used this week, that you basically
I did.
Yeah, and it was successful.
Yeah, so the side project where I put the video player in a mecha, it made updating the video player a lot nicer, with the exception of the
So much
VPN that I
easier.
swear at.
So that finally loaded my view source. I swear that that address is not actually that slow. But the big deal with what unbundled builds gets you is standard workflow. So like for Nikki to ingest the video player, she git clones that repo, goes into it, runs yarn add at LRN web components / video hyphen player, or the Ali video player, whichever one, and then adds it to one file and does yarn install and then yarn run build, and gets an output that has effectively 5 lines of integration code, no matter what the platform is. So I'm going to assume, Nikki, is that right, that this is basically what your integration looked like?
Yep, it was. And it was so much better than dealing with all of the other scripts that I had initially when I had the player in there. Because it was using Zend, and I had to, figure out the order and how I was actually going to work around it. But this made it so much nicer. I was able to drop a ton of lines.
So the magic of that file and what the routine is doing is it's effectively figuring out at runtime what version of the assets to serve you. Whether it's late, like Evergreen browser, which is ES8, even though it claims ES6 here, or some older stuff. And then for older stuff, it actually ships you the polyfills. So it's a lot lighter weight than just giving them to everybody, which is what most build routines do. They give you every asset. We just give you the entryway. So why that's important is what we've done historically is like stuff like this. So we've got a tag, we'll actually load up way too many tags. I don't know why that page is so large. Load up way too many tag definitions into the DOM. And if you look here with this circle spinner thing, it's actually paper spinner, which is tapping an AJAX call and a token tag, all the way up. So what I'm trying to get towards, and it's not from our integrations necessarily, but I think this puts us at odds with what most people are doing in industry. Most people are going to say, we're building an application, yay, we're done. And then they run a script and they get this big thing that they just add to the page and go, hey, it's a web app. All of the use cases that we've described have another person that's actually creating the content. And it's so like we're creating the environment for that person to create the content, but we don't know what the content's going to be. So what this is, or what I tried to work on in the last week, because there were some interesting ideas that came out of conversations last week, is I worked on something called dynamic import registry. So it's a vanilla JavaScript element that is a singleton that you ask for, and then it doesn't do a ton. Like there's not a lot of code here. It's like 100 lines. But the important thing it's doing is it's able to dispatch events and listen for those events on the window in this case. So what this thing is doing is it's listening for things that say they have an element that someone might want to use. So the way that we can leverage that then, if I get this little share bar from Zoom out of the way, there we go, is can be demonstrated first in this thing called Mutation Observer import. So the way that you would actually leverage this is someone says, hey, give me the registry. You might tell it where your assets are located, and then you register what the things to potentially import are. Now, why this is important is because, again, I don't know if you're viewing a web page that has Wikipedia query on it, but I've set up the conditions by which someone who's the content contributor could use HAX potentially, or be building a new website, or like in Nikki's case, she's augmenting an existing application. She doesn't want to have to load every part of HAX or every part of Elms just to get to the video tag. She also doesn't want to have to manage all the build step, and as she said before, like getting all that JavaScript in place correctly. So what we're trying to aim for is almost zero config, just tags understand that they should, it's called hydrate, but basically have their definition applied. So what this looks like, hopefully if this repo starts, let's see. SSL protocol error, that's adorable. Let's see if I can go to the other one. No, I can't, okay. No, I can't show that one because of SSL protocol error, that was nice. But the idea is, with this Mutation Observer import tag, anything that you put inside of it, it has a Mutation Observer that's gonna process anything that's added into it. So what a Mutation Observer is it's a primitive part of the spec in JavaScript that basically just is notified anytime anything changes in the DOM. So in this case, this little snippet is saying, every time a new child is added to this tag, I need you to run through it, and if it's a web component, then I need you to process it. And that process it goes and checks the registry and says, hey, import the definition on the fly. So what we get with that is a page that loads that has very few things actually required to get the page to start. And then if elements exist, the fact that the elements are in the page is what makes the definition import. I started working on this in a prototype form 2 years ago after probably the 5th time I was swearing at Dr. Charles Severance, that I only mentioned because there's a Perio people on here. Because you just couldn't get the notion that, you know, I just want these tags to work. I just want them to show up. I'm like, that's not the way that this spec works. It's like, well, then no one will adopt it. And I was like, that's actually not inaccurate. So what I'm trying to do is boil the world down to, you put the tags on the page, copy and paste this thing at the top, and they magically work. So I think I have the conditions whereby next week I'll be able to do that on any website. So I got this thing working right before we started, called WC Auto Load. It's now published to NPM. So what it does is it pulls in the registry, which again just lets things say, hey, this is the tag and where the definition is. And then, unlike our other singletons, and this is a weird pattern, Nikki, I wanted to at least point out, so maybe I get your feedback on. This singleton also injects a window event that is for when the DOM is loaded. And when the DOM's loaded, it then forcibly applies the singleton. So
that's different.
So the fact that this file is referenced is the only thing you need to get the JavaScript injected into the page, and it's hitting things at the right timing.
Wow.
So this calls for the loader, which is called WC Auto Load. So imagine, and I'll show it in a second, there's tags sitting in the page. And then it will register anything that it finds in a global variable that has the list of what to do. And then this is a fun query selector you can do. Document.querySelectorAll not, and then :defined. So if you do this, this is a very small bridge between CSS and JavaScript where you can query the page for all the tags that don't have a definition. So this would return Wikipedia-query if there's no definition in Web Components spec for Wikipedia query. So at runtime, it checks are all the things not defined, and then it processes them automatically and loads their definition in. Then taking some of that mutation observer code from before, it's basically just listening on the body for any new tags to show up. So what I can do with all that jazz is boil the world down to, and a production integration would look like, get rid of that line. Imagine that this says like build.js or something, right? Would basically just point to WC auto load and then pass this little snippet here, something that we can in our tooling generate automatically, just this huge object that's keyed by what a tag's name is and where it lives. And by having that stuff live in the page, then any tag you use will automatically import its definition on the fly. So if I go to this page, we inspect and view network and do JS and I reload, right, we get Wikipedia query. However, I didn't load Wikipedia query. If you look at the way that the tree starts to dedupe here, you can see it's hitting these files at the top of the page, which are just some polyfills for local work. It imports these two files, and then it immediately goes to work importing the other things involved. Now, I don't have to demonstrate this, I don't have a meme maker tag in here, right? There's no definition for meme maker. But I'm gonna go into the HTML directly. I'm going to edit grid plate as HTML. And I'm gonna add, I have in my copy and paste history a meme, there we go. So I've got this meme maker usage, and then because it's in a grid plate, I'm gonna have to write slot equals 1. Whoops, I hit the wrong button. Oh, slot equals column hyphen 1. Maybe. I appear to have made it angry. Let's try to. Pretty sure that's all it was. Let's paste it in again and try it again. Yay, live demo. Slot equals call hyphen 1. Oops. Huh, it's not putting, it's not showing up there. That's weird. No, let's try and put it at the top of the document. Hey, there we go. All right, so what then happens, and I don't know why gridplate wasn't showing it, it is actually in there, or was in there, so maybe I put it in between tags accidentally or something. Try that again, because it's making me mad. Slot 3, whoops. Hey, there we go, put it in slot 3. So what happened there is, if you look at the network, you see way out here, and it's probably like, yeah, it's way out here, right? It's 4 seconds after the page loaded, which is when I went and did that. It imported the definition for meme maker because the mutation observer watching the whole page realized there's a new definition for meme maker and just went and imported the resource. So what we can do with this is have a insanely small time to first paint page load in any content management system. And as long as we've done the unbundled builds and we put it on a CDN, people could basically copy like one line of code and start using any of our library of tags, and they'll just import themselves automatically.
Holy moly.
That is really cool.
So, for example, if you had the H-A-X tag, that could have the exact same integration routine as the video player, as paper button, as anything else. We don't actually need to know or care what you're putting in the DOM. The DOM will figure out and import automatically, which is...
Where's the correlation between the tag and the JavaScript?
So that is in, there's a window.wc autoload registry. And so, like if I take out these two things, as evidence, save, and then go here, all my definitions go away. Now, in most production environments, you won't need that. That's literally something I need for local development. But the tags are all defined in this little registry here. So like, for example, if I wanted H-A-X, h-a-x/h-a-x. Okay. And now we go to the DOM as it's here, and we inspect again. And then we're going to get real crazy. We're going to actually edit as HTML. And I haven't tried this, so we'll see what happens.
See if it gets us fired.
Yeah, I think this will work. So then if we wrap it in HAX tags.
Jesus.
Oh my God.
HAX pulls itself in and then makes all of the stuff that was there a second ago editable. Now the styling is, clearly a little off because there's no, there's something you have to import as well that makes the styles happy. Because you can see my little drag handle, but I could, that's some minor cleanup most likely on that part. But it's going to go and dedupe and everything's going to get its dependencies and shove them in the page. So the mutation observer is also set for being deep, or it's not deep, it's called a subtree.
Subtree, yeah.
So theoretically, I should be able to just put any old tag down here. Well, I can't do it. Well, I could do meme maker. Can
you explain what that means, that it's set to be a subtree?
Yeah. Hold on, let me see if it works. Oh, good, it still did it. Okay, so the way a mutation observer works, let me reload the page. So the way a mutation observer works is it's monitoring a tag. So what I said in the mutation observer was any change in the body, it basically notifies an event. So what the mutation observer looks like, and they're really simple, and you can use, I'm pretty sure can I uses flaw at this point. Can I use? But let's just verify. There we go. Yeah. So mutation observer, and that goes all the way back to IE11. Like, you've been able to use these for a while.
Oh, Opera Mini.
I hate that they still have some of these on here, like QQ browser. Oh, thank God it works in QQ. So what the mutation observer is it's going to run this function every time it notices a mutation. Now, a mutation to the DOM is defined here. So you say, so you basically tee it up and then you apply it here. So I say, hey, observe, and this is the target to observe. So in this case, I'm saying observe the whole document. And then child list means any of the nodes directly below me, right? So one level deep. Subtree, though, says anything below me, even if it's in the children. And so the reason that this callback got hit when I put meme maker into the page deep into the, right? So that first part, if I take, actually, let me take that off to prove it. So if I take off subtree, because that's not the default, and then we go into our page, I probably don't even need to refresh. But now if I go into this div and I edit as HTML and we paste meme maker, it's there. However, the definition of meme maker is not, because this sample has some progressive enhancement to it. Now, if I were to take that meme maker tag and move it up into the body, it now taps the mutation observer and you get the definition unpacked. So see how it has a shadow root now? I love that this demo actually just worked. Did not plan any of this. So yeah, I think this is gonna be one of the most important tags that we ever write.
Kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's what makes unbundled builds, it's what it needs. Yeah.
Which, if we, so that file, or sorry, not that file, that the next step is that JSON array, right, that has the key, because Andrew asked what where that relation is. In our tooling, if we use the custom element JSON files or whatever, and we just analyze that and generate that dynamically. So we could easily, now I don't know how big that tree is gonna be, to be perfectly honest, but we could easily just have a simple gulp routine that hits all the package JSONs and basically combines them all into one, which is more or less what yarn install does in a monorepo anyway. Combine them all into one and then look at what those top level dependencies are. I don't care what the lower tag is for the most part. And then just auto generate that blob, throw it into our build routine so that when our build routine goes and compiles all these assets to work unbundled, it generates that thing as a special type of endpoint integration, if you will. And that endpoint integration just loads that tag. So then basically you get to use any web component in our universe that we ever push up to our CDN, you're going to pull in 3 dependencies. Now you're only referencing one file, but that file is going to then hit 2 other files to just tee things up. Then anywhere in your application or your CMS or LMS or whatever, if you've used a web component that's in the registry, it just shows up automatically. So that's also going to reduce time to first paint to like trivial levels comparatively. So right now, like in Elms, if I do a reload, it's pretty fast because it hits that one file at the bottom, but then it has to go get everything. Previously, like with what Nikki was doing to get it to work on that Omeka site and on it, I mean, she was just following what I was doing prior to that. It actually was a part of the page. And so as the DOM's being processed, it has to go out and get all those JavaScript files in order to complete the page rendering. So now we'll have, one extra file that taps 2 other small files. They'll get cached at the CDN layer. And then whatever you use, it shows up because of the way dynamic imports work. I don't know how that's going to interface with like the legacy build routine stuff. I think it'll be okay, but we'll really have to do some testing. I plan on doing some testing next week around this, but yeah, that would be utterly ridiculous for Penn State hosting a CDN. I mean, you could go to with that code, Nikki, we could go to like World Campus and give them 2 lines of code and they could use your video player.
Yeah.
And they don't have to do anything. They just add the 2 lines of JavaScript to a template basically. It would be terrible.
It would be very terrible.
That is extremely impressive. I'm impressed.
I'm seriously like falling over right now.
So that means anybody at Penn State can use the video player that has been the bane of my existence.
I'm only burning my half. All you care about is money.
It's the wrong movie. He wasn't in D3.
It's the wrong movie. Yeah, he didn't get the reference. That's okay. Yeah, I think that's what I had something called like dynamic import or lazy import discover. And before that, last week I showed something where you had to actually write dimport in the page. And that's stuff that would make life better for us, but not for like your typical person writing HTML. Especially if you pegged this with Nikki's work in the Storybook, we could basically communicate to the university and beyond, I mean, beyond the university, but I mean, if we have Penn State elements, for example, like if you had a PSU-logo element, you don't need to learn how to integrate it anymore. You just read the Storybook that says, copy and paste this, and then the other part that says, hey, to use anything on this website, copy and paste this, 2 lines, and it would just be sitting there monitoring for changes. Now, I am a little curious about the performance implications of a monitor the entire DOM for changes mutation observer. Mutation observers have gotten a lot less expensive with the last several releases of browsers. And by several, I mean like last 2 years, because it used to be kind of a like, hey, only use this if you really know what you're doing. So I am a little curious about how that'll scale front-end performance-wise with the subtree flag, because that subtree is that's every change to the DOM, it's sending a record bubbling up, right? So imagine you've got an application that dynamically loads stuff. I don't know if that's gonna bubble up a whole ton of stuff.
But I mean, you could add additional filters on that, looking for like particular tags and things along those lines.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, part of it is, so we roll this out and we just say, hey, anybody, you can do this and get access to these and this works, right? And that has only certain level of scale, max performance, right? But at least it empowers people. For us, we do that, Andrew. We say like, well, here's the whitelist, or I'm only going to actually do the Mutation Observer on this piece. The real test, what I'll tee up next week, or at least looking if I have enough time, is replace the way HAX CMS sets its site up and try to use that instead. So HAX CMS, if I get that registry built, right, that HAX CMS loads from a single tag, well, it has a file that is the entry point, and the entry point hits the HAX CMS site builder tag, and then it kind of figures out the rest of the universe. HAX CMS pages, when they load, dynamically import the definitions, like they have code that does that already. So I could take all that out if this actually pays off the way I'm thinking. I also have to look and see, does the subtree flag bubble up shadow children? I don't think it does, which would be a good thing. If it does, that could be a crippling performance type of a thing. So super experimental. I still got to see, what the implications of this are, but you peg it with some of the CI workflow stuff that Potter is working on. Like he was updating that container, just like click a button, it's there. If we ever get around to cache expiration nicely, then we can ship people the best version of the asset at runtime. But there was a reason I wanted Mike and Nikki to go first, because I knew some of you would understand the implication of what that does. So.
That is pretty cool.
I mean, the fact that it completely changes the web components game.
I mean, usage of it, because I think everybody that's in this space they forget that, like, my students did a blog post, or they were told, hey, blog on dev.to. And one of them, he went through and he actually wrote like what would be a legitimate, dev.to article. And he said like, hey, if you're not familiar with front end, here's how you get started at that level. And I thought, wow, that's the part everybody always skips. Is he actually went in and said like, here's how you install Node. Here's what this does. Like, and it's not super in the weeds, but he has all the like copy and paste these 10 commands, and now you can be a front end developer and play. And I think web components and React and all of them more or less skip that part in the learning curve and don't give credence to the fact that people were able to just pick up and copy and paste jQuery and it worked. And like, that's a big deal for low barriers to entry. I mean, that's why I got into JavaScript, is I could copy an example and it worked. And when you get into this sphere, you can't copy an example and it doesn't work.
Exactly.
Or you can, and it still doesn't work, and none of the help documents are actually helpful,
Right.
as in Storybook without the OpenWC version.
Yeah, that is very true. So I'm hoping, Andrew, that if we can get a like, here's the example web page, copy and paste this, and put, here's your 50 different tag definitions, and they just work, that'll start to unlock more of the jQuery-esque hacker developer. It's unfortunate Collins just fell off the call, but he introduced himself as saying he's not a developer, which is really sad, because when we all started this journey, he was a developer, and it just got way too complex. And he just said like, I'm going to focus on the thing I'm good at, and backed away from it. I mean,
well, quite honestly, I mean, I've been a developer for 15 years, and getting into web components it's hard. And it's not because of the web components. It's because of the build routines that are required in order to get everything working. Like, building a web component actually is not hard. Getting it to work in some website, that's hard. And
Are you guys
this
using
fixes
ES6
stuff.
though? for all your components?
Sorry, what'd you say, Earl?
Are you guys using ES6 for all your web components?
So we write Mike might know this better than me. I think we write generally in ES6. We might end up using some conventions that are ES7 or ES8. Because like we'll use spread operators and stuff, and I'm not sure what version that's in. But the way that we get the definitions to our end users is I run a build routine that compiles to 3 different targets. So the evergreen target is actually ES8, using some recommendations that Justin Fajani blogged about that basically said like you can compile to ES8 and that will work. You know, universally in anything that's evergreen, probably for about the last 3 years. Then I have a build routine that works in some squishy versions of Firefox that are ES6 compatible, but not web components compatible without polyfills. And then I have a build routine that's ES5 that attempts, emphasis on attempts, to hit like IE11 and the older version of Edge. And sadly, I've found several versions of Safari, even as high as like 10.1, that I just have to serve ES5 compiled code to be safe. So our build routine actually generates all 3 copies, and they sit in parallel. And then we have a single like script build.js file that figures out on the front end which of those 3 you need based on your features. So that's how we've gotten around the ES6 shipping.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just been my experience that like with all the new I mean the builds in JavaScript are so they're so complex nowadays, and it's kind of like a breath of fresh air when you go to something like ES6, right? And you don't even need a build routine of any kind at all. You don't even need NPM. You don't need it. And, you know, I wonder, I just have this feeling that at some point, all of that stuff is going to like collapse on itself because of the complexity that it's gotten to. And that eventually things will just start to change. Like, you know, you look at all these projects out there that are using, you know, that are, you know, based on, they're using Node to do a lot of their unit testing and things like that, which makes a lot of sense, right? But then the artifacts that they're producing don't actually run in the browser. You know, you can't use any of those things in the browser, which makes no sense to me, like none at all, other than from a developer's perspective to say, I want to unit test my stuff, and that's it. And I just feel like there's this big chasm here in this space right now. And I just hope it works itself out eventually.
Oops, I'm trying to post links to the chat and then I put them in wrong. Have you read the Pika packages? I'll call it the Pika the unbundling manifesto, because I don't know what he actually calls it. I
haven't. This is my own musings that I've seen, and I'm just tired of it.
So this call is tired of it as well.
Oh yes, you are with the right people.
So, no, go ahead, Nikki.
Oh, I was going to say this. A lot of it reminds me of when I interned in city government years ago, like 20, 25 years ago. People in the city government would deliberately make complex systems of their work and not document or share what they were doing because they thought it was job security. And I feel like there's a whole generation of people who learn to develop in these complex ecosystems, maybe did not have to do the basics. And so now they have this great job security, knowing how to manage these crazy ecosystems. And it's job security. It's a city worker.
Or it's, you know, I've been writing stuff in React and I went to a React training thing and this is the way that we make React, and hey, I know this build routine. Oh, you need to learn Webpack? Well, cool, whatever. I mean, like I just learned Webpack. It's not a big deal. And it's right in the wheelhouse of what I'm doing with React. And oh, look, I can go to Vue. Oh, I'm going to do a build on a project. Oh, it uses Webpack. Like it just keeps, it's a whole ecosystem of things that are stitched together that you know, a thing that really got me, Earl, is when I went off on this was, I was like, why do people have such an issue with these conventions? I don't understand why you don't just write stuff in ES6. And the Pika, the guy behind Pika wrote a blog post that's like, hey, are you coming from a project that used Webpack? Here's some things that aren't actually in JavaScript. And I was like, oh, now I'm interested. And one of the big things is that in build routines that involve Webpack, you can write import, you know, my CSS file from thing.css. And there's a huge portion of the world that thinks that is a real convention. And instead, it's a compile time convention that Webpack makes possible. Now, just extrapolate that to how many people have made how many millions of projects that have a convention like that somewhere in it, because they're like, well, I just want to use that CSS file. And they're not wrong, but that's not a part of the platform. So they've got this like this mishmash of what real JavaScript is, what ES6 provides, and then what Webpack and other things are doing on their behalf that they're addicted to and don't entirely know which is which. So we are totally on board with what you said. Like, I totally skipped all of that. Our build routine, we do things unbundled, as I always frame it. And unbundled is basically just like, we do compile for targets, but you're still ultimately going to be like ES6 / you know, at LRN web components / HAX / HAX.js. You're not going to get this just mashed together everything, in part because of that, because like it's just we were maintaining, you know, Webpack and roll-up files. Even roll-up's a little easier to use for sure, but yeah, it's just I think it's all going to come crashing down eventually. Pika has
that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm like waiting for, is for I'm hoping that's going to happen. It's just there's this divide that exists right now, and it's just I don't get it. I mean, I'm sort of like, I'm not understanding why projects haven't already started, you know, moving to like take like the little bit of stuff I was looking at with CK Editor, right? And you know, all, you know, none of their stuff, there's no ES6 artifacts for it, you know, they're all node based, you know, and there's nothing. In what world does that help me? Because in what way would you not be using CK Editor in the client, right? That's the only place you'd ever be using it to begin with. So it makes it literally, I mean, I get it from a build perspective to say, look, I've got all these unit tests that I need to run. And so I want to run it, you know, I got to run all these things against it. Fine, I get that. But produce your ES6 artifacts so that people can actually like use it without having to, you know, without having to jump through like, you know, 10,000 hoops, it feels like.
Well, and the other thing is like they'll do this tree shaking so that they can lazy load some stuff. I mean, or rip out code that's not there. Like, to me, you're throwing, in that case, I'm bundling CK Editor into our build routine. It goes out the door. So your whole app has CK Editor in it. Like, it's a huge library.
Yeah, it's huge. Oh, that's the prop. That's why, listen, I wanted this like in an earlier release, and I actually pulled it back because of all these issues, because it's basically you're building your own CK Editor. That's what you're doing. In the end, you're building your own CK Editor. Yes, you're using Node to kind of, you know, bring in all your functionality and your targets and everything, that all the features and that you want. But in the end, you know, it's Webpack that produces your final piece of JS, and that piece of JS is no different than what the older versions of CK Editor were doing. And it's so like nothing has moved forward. You know what I mean? And I'm just blown away. And here I am trying to do everything in ES6 and be like, look, I don't need build platforms. I don't need all this stuff. I don't need it. I just write my ES6 and it works. And see you later.
I think you would see a fundamental rift in mindset between Silicon Valley app developers who are 30 and under, and those of us that have worked on like monoliths, you know, in like the LMS, CMS space, to go like, no, that's great. You're building an app and it ships and then someone downloads it. my people actually make the content in the thing. I'm creating the environment by which they do that. I don't know what's going to be there.
Right.
And everyone I talk to is like, well, then, you know, I mean, you don't, well, I don't know, actually. Like, so, I mean, even down to like performance recommendations. Like, I think what we're doing is at odds with what performance recommendations are at times. But I'm like, okay, but if you're trying to sell a widget, I got to get you a website as fast as possible. I'm not opposed to not getting you the website as fast as possible. But if I have a captive audience, as monoliths typically do, I can burn an extra second to get you the assets so that all of the additional page loads send you less data and has a faster experience. So it's stuff that it's really hard to find conversations about, quite honestly. Every time I've brought something up about integrating web components with CMS, people come out of the woodwork and are like, oh, that makes so much sense to do it this way. I've been wondering how you do da-da-da, because everything seems about app building. Like,
yeah, gotcha. I got you now. It makes sense, that point of view. I mean, it's not a great point of view, but it's a point of view.
So does anybody have we got 9 minutes left. Does anybody have anything else they wanted to talk about before we zone out for the week and check email 5% less? Good. So with that, this is the HAX. I'll get it over there because Nikki liked the sticker.
Yes, I want one.
This has been, I'll send you them whenever the crisis is over. I have 100 or so. This has been the HAX
A letter
the web.
cost you a stamp, my friend.
Put
it in an envelope.
I'm not gonna risk licking a stamp, okay?
Wait,
I know that's where they put the COVIDs.
No, I would be the one at risk because it would have been you licking the envelope, and the stamps are sticky.
You know,
then,
Tom, you try to have a nice
then I would have
exit
to
where you
open
say the end of the show and you say like, oh, this is the end of the episode. We're going to do this consistent thing. And wouldn't you know it, Nikki always has to hijack it.
I do. It's my job.
Why are you
okay,
gonna put
because
stamp?
You can always try again, and then just like I can cut out this section right now,
No,
and then just make it
this
seem
out.
like
nope. We're just leaving the banter. The banter.
No, I think that
is
stamp thing is
key.
pretty important.
The banter is really key. But anyway,
I think
tune in
physically.
next Friday for another Uncode. Thank you all for joining us in conversation, and we'll see you 7 days from now.